Well, again, we have here today something interesting, and I think that something that many people will consider special. We have a Mahzor, and one of the probably many Mahzorim in my collection. Yet this Mahzor is a little bit different than the Mahzor that I'm accustomed to buying. Perhaps, maybe before I talk about what it is, I'll talk about where it's been. It was in Eastern Europe, the beginning of the 19th century, and it has a censor stamp from 1838. This censor stamp from the eastern part of what is today the eastern part of Ukraine, what was then in the Russian Empire under the Russian Tsar, and um, I don't know anything more about it other than the fact that at some point it came to the United States, and its owner was a, a Jew who owned Hebrew books, and he worked in probably one of the industrial areas in Virginia. And uh, I was able to get it through an estate auction that what things were being liquidated from an estate in Virginia, and this came through there. Now, this, as I mentioned, is a machzor, and it is a machzor printed in a town in also in the Ukraine today. The town is called known as Slavita or Slavuta as it was pronounced by the Ukrainians, or Slavita in the Jewish Yiddish pronunciation. And the printer is very famous even today and has a lot of devotees among the Judaica collectors. First of all, simply because he was the grandson of Rabbi Pinchas of Koretz. Rabbi Pinchas of Koretz was a student of the Baal Shem Tov. And beginning with his father, who was Moshe Shapiro Spiro, the printing began in Slavita. Printing, I should say one thing about printing in the Eastern Europe, which really began its heyday with the printing of Koretz. And since his Shmuel Avram Shapira, the printer of this volume, began in Slavita, and his grandfather was in Koretz, that probably doesn't have it. That probably is not a coincidence. So, as the printing progressed, past the year 1795 and 1800, Eastern European Hebrew books began taking on their own appearance and their own colors and their own materials. And this volume is one such that the paper is gray blue, which a lot of them do have. That just has to do with the quality of the paper and the different investments they made in paper. It was actually cheaper for them. But today it's more valuable just because the color is nice. And what's called the rubric on the title, the red. So the word Machzor, Shalosh Rigolim, Chelek Sheni, Bislabita, Spira. Those are the five things which are read on this title page. And it's this is Nusach Ashkenaz, but Nusach Ashkenaz and Nusach Sfard were printed. Yet, however, there it is not the same Nusach Ashkenaz as you will find in the Machzorim actually printed in Ashkenaz, in the ones printed in Sulzbach and such, which was one of the major production centers of the German Machzorim. It is not the same Nusach Ashkenaz, because this is the Nusach Ashkenaz that was prayed in Eastern Europe, in the Ukraine. Another thing about this Machzor is that the Yiddish was redone, because had a Jew in the early 19th century in the Ukraine heard the Western Yiddish being spoken, he would have thought he was hearing German. And a German would not understand this Yiddish as it was spoken either in the Eastern Europe. So this Yiddish was recreated for people who spoke this version of Yiddish in the early 19th century. There's also a short commentary. This commentary also has parts of the Zohar and a little bit of Hasidus in it. And those are things that are unique to this Machzor. Another thing that is interesting but not that unique to this edition is that there are different miniature engravings for the zodiac, of the images that appear with each month. Leo is of lion, Arie, and it has a picture of a lion. And being that this Mahzor was divided in what was known as a winter Mahzor and a summer Mahzor. A summer Mahzor was Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot. This one was called the winter Mahzor, but is the winter Mahzor for Eastern Europe. So it begins with Sukkot and has Pesach, would also have Hanukkah, Pesach, Shavuos, finishes at Shavuos, allowing the other volume to only have the High Holy Days, the Yom Noraim as they're known. So it's also a bit of a different division between the two volumes, as it was traditionally printed and written in manuscript. These zodiac images appear again with what's called the Tefillas Tal, which is the prayer for dew, which is recited on Pesach as the winter has finished, and that prayer also appears with one of the piyutim that follows the prayer for dew appears with these same miniature engravings, which I find interesting. Not all customs of the Eastern Europe recited what was also known as the Akdamos, which was a medieval composition in Aramaic, and not everybody recited that. But in this Mahzor, the Akdamos are printed. And that ends what's interesting about this Mahzor, and I think that it is also it is also desirable not only for its content but who owned it. And what I mean by who owned it is also who printed it and who handled it and in their shop. And being that there is the intellectual aspect to owning Judaica, but there is also what is like sort of a relic aspect, that you're holding something that was printed by the grandson of Rabbi Pinchas of Koretz. So it's the grandson of a student of the Baal Shem Tov, and the printer himself was a student of Rav Zusha, as is known, and therefore these volumes of Slavuta have really gained almost a relic status in the Judaical world, that you want to hold something of a material that they own, and not just something that represents the intellectual aspect of books. So that's something interesting that I'm not usually in contact with, but there are those who collect Judaica just for the relic aspect of it, which again is at the other end. So this was just something interesting which I got recently, and I wanted to share with you, the Slavuta Mahzor of 1827.